You know, you can call them espionage agents, you can call them intelligence asset, you can call them journalists, you can call them filmmakers. You know, they were arrested in Togo, and initially they were arrested on the charges of espionage. They were detained from 27th of the month. They were detained up until the 30th of the month. You know, this is 2 days detention with serious investigation going on. You know, and after everything happened, their equipment were confiscated, and after their equipment were confiscated, you know, we started hearing about charges of earth concern, and the French foreign ministry, you know, they weighed into the situation, and now we are hearing that the charges have been dropped, and you know, the gravity of the offense is now reduced. You know, you definitely know that somebody has already called somebody that knows somebody. The question we need to ask at this point is how honest and how, you know, how transparent is the Togolese judicial system, and how professional are their personnel? Because at the end of the day, Togo is not going to get out of this with a clean glove. At the end of the day, it's either they get their knuckles wet with blood or they get their reputation dampened. Because if you say you are charging somebody on espionage case, and at the end of the day, it is not espionage, it has a lot to do about the professionalism of your personnel. And on the other hand, you know, Togo can't just get out of this case. They can't get out clean. So this is why we're here today to break it down. You know, if I catch you the first time and I saw what I saw and I said, the guy that I've just caught, you know, I'm catching him based on issues of espionage, and I detain you for 3 good days. I confiscated your equipment. I did all those things because I knew what I saw. I won't be confiscating your equipment if I did not understand what was going on, right? But at the end of the day, after multiple calls came in, you know, and you were supposed to be charged to court, and the case was dropped, you know, the charges were, they were toned down a little bit, and now they're talking about releasing this personnel. And just to give you another pointer, they were arrested, they were briefly released, and after they were released, they were rearrested again. That is to tell you that the essence, the purpose of the arrest in the first place was justified. But I think the officers that arrested these two French personnel, they might not be those high-ranking officers that count. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's get into it. According to information, two men, Guy Mocaër and Sebastian Perez-Pezzani, they call them documentary filmmakers. Now, I want you to pay good attention, because at the end of the day, I am going to tell you the reason why. Whatever you think you are, you don't go to an environment where you have the reputation of causing a lot of harm than good. French personnel, French journalists, French whatsoever in the continent of Africa right now, they are next to being criminals. If you find a French citizen in the desert right now, he's probably a terrorist. Point blank, period, case closed. The proof is in the pudding. Look, I can speak based on my emotion, but statistics don't lie. If you find a French citizen in a journalist right now in 2026, I'm telling you, your first intention should be, this is a terrorist. Or probably is there to deliver some equipment to a terrorist. Is there to film something that is going to undermine the sovereignty of your country. French nationals right now, they are next to terrorists. So if you carry the citizenship of France, you better know that we don't really see you as something, you know, reasonable in the society, because of the kind of reputation your government, your administration, your media, everything that you all stand for right now is nothing better than terrorism in Africa. French citizens have been arrested in the last couple months in Madagascar. They were arrested for espionage. In fact, they were not only arrested for espionage, they were arrested based on charges of destabilizing the entire country, bombing the electrical grid. That was the plan, and they were arrested. French journalists were arrested in Gabon for espionage. French journalists were arrested in Namibia when they tried to bring out an editorial to maneuver a contractual agreement that Total Petrol Station, Total Petroleum were trying to, manipulate a contractual agreement together with Petrobras when it comes to energy transaction in Namibia. In Togo, in Mali, in the case of Ian Vesili, in Burkina Faso. Ladies and gentlemen, when you see French citizens right now, I mean, protect yourself at all time because these guys are just too dangerous. If you have a gun and you see a French citizen, get it out of safety because anything can happen. You might just, I'm not, look, I stand to be corrected. I'm just saying, allegedly, you need to get your gun out of safety because a mujahideen might just be in front of you. So these two men, they were arrested. According to information, they entered Togo. Now, a lot of people, if you're an African, you know how porous the African border is. And all of these things, it has a lot to do with how people are being indoctrinated. Most of the Togolese forces are trained in Paris. Most of them were trained in Charlemagne. Most of them were trained in France. So, whose interests do you think most of these officers would serve? Most of them were not trained in Africa. According to the video I watched recently, the Malian officers were saying that they trained in Saint Etienne. Most of them trained outside the country. For what purpose? To obey the clarion call of France when France needs them to be activated. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome King Days. When French citizens, when they come into the country, you don't expect Togolese officers to do the necessary check. We understand these things as Africans. As long as you're a foreigner and you have some money in your wallet, African police, they are going to let you go. But ladies and gentlemen, when time times a man and man can no longer time himself, things just continue to go wrong from left to right. So I do believe that these men entered Togo by paying their way out because everything is supposed to align. But when you pay your way into a place and you are entering illegally, you might end up meeting some type of personnel that were not indoctrinated the same way the officers you paid were indoctrinated. So you are going to have a conflict right there. So, ladies and gentlemen, these two men, they entered Togo illegally. According to information, they were credentialed as news reporter. They were in northern Togo shooting an episode of Les Routes the Impossible Route. That is what it means, right? A documentary series on the French public broadcaster France 5 television channel, produced by Tony Committee Production. A Togolese fixer, Komi Mafuwemo, all right, Fred Vadomi, were working with them. Now, how can I enter your country and call a certain place and call it the impossible route? Probably on claims that those routes, they are very, very dangerous. That means I'm trying to affiliate your country with an epicenter of terrorism. That means I'm trying to say that this particular route is one of the routes that is under serious contest. Maybe the terrorist controls it. Maybe the terrorists collect taxations. Maybe this is one of their trade routes. So now listen, Do you send a common journalist into those type of zone, or do you send somebody that is highly trained in high risk situation? Do you send people that are well trained on how to maneuver their way through dangerous environments? Ladies and gentlemen, and this is where the French DGSE apply. It's just like you're sending a CIA. It's like you're sending an MI5 or MI6 agent to go and record, and the framing, everything. They are trained to do this. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the historical proof for this. All right. So they were sent, they were already capturing the documentary, and they were already framing the country, and they were already framing that part as a dangerous part that is under the control of terrorists in Togo. Ladies and gentlemen, they were ultimately charged with espionage when they were first arrested. Now, let's get it very, very clear. When they were first arrested, all right, that means they made certain confession because they were detained from the 27th to the 30th. So they made some statements, and that statement led to the confiscation of their equipment. If I am the first to arrest you, and I saw what you were filming, and I saw some of the, voiceovers, definitely I am the guy that has the right evidence to everything you were doing. So if the first guys to arrest these individuals said that they were carrying out espionage, ladies and gentlemen, they were truly carrying out espionage. But ladies and gentlemen, that is not the only thing. You see, when something is about to go wrong, every step of the way, it will be one wrong after another wrong. So when they were first arrested, police initially accused them of espionage and interrogated them, all right, for hours at the Kara police station. Now, that is the framing that went viral. Now, a lot of people don't understand how African security situation work. When the police grab you, you know, when they drive across, everybody is going to know. Nigeria, African police, when they are driving, they horn their sirens, they carry their gun as if they've just gone to capture one of the biggest kashala or the dogogide of the world, and everybody's going to come out. What happened? Why were they arrested? And mind you, when you were arrested, people were there and they had the conversation. So even right in the police station, there are other accused right there behind the counter. Look, I've been in all those situations before, so I know what I'm talking about. So when you are arrested, there are people right inside a police station that are, before you have to talk to the 2IC, the inspectors on the bench. When they are talking to you, other people can listen, probably speak French, and France is the official language, so they understand why these idiots have been detained. Now, that is not the only thing. Now, when they were arrested and interrogated, their exhibits were retrieved from them. Now, but when the case reached the courts, so this is what happened now between the police station and the courts. Something happened. You know what we're talking about? Between the police station and the court, something happened. The former charge was espionage, which was supposed to carry a serious consequence. But the charges were reduced between the police station and the court of law. It was reduced to false declaration, that is, false statements, a much lesser offense. The espionage angle did not hold up with the former charge. Now, according to information, before they went to court, the French Foreign Ministry already called in. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask you the billion-dollar question. What do you think the French Foreign Ministry, what do you think they discussed with the Togolese authorities? Are these people really clean? That was why at the beginning of this video, I said, no matter what happens, at the end of the day, the Togolese are not coming out clean on this one. They are not coming out clean. you you can't go swim in a pot of oil and expect to come out clean. Hell no, you are not coming out clean. Now, I'm going to tell you some other things about this case that makes it look very, very funny. According to the official reports, RSF, Reporters Without Border, they said RSF calls for the immediate release of French filmmakers Gaël, Sebastian Pezzani, and their Togolese fixer, Fred Vodomi, who are in pretrial detention. So this is not an ordinary case. Ladies and gentlemen, permit me to show you the faces of this individual. So these are the guys that have just been arrested according to RSF, information. These are the faces. The black guy right there, that is the Togolese mixer that was helping them. Now, when they tell you that a Togolese mixer was there, you would think that, okay, because a mixer is there, nothing is gonna happen on the wrong. No. You just have to be paid. You can be a translator. You can be paid because you live in the environment and you know how to navigate your way around the environment. So they pay you money, and you know the economic situation of this guy. So they shouldn't use him. And look at the faces of this man. If you put a shemag around these faces, man, these are terrorists, man. you can you can't do no wrong. These are legitimate terrorists, man. Don't tell me that these men whose face I'm looking at are journalists. No, they don't look anything like journalists, man. So they were arrested. The three of them were detained, and after making some confessions, the case was upgraded to the level of the court. Now, listen, if you were arrested, and on the third day, it took 3 days for you to be released, and when you were released on the third day, the police had to come after you and arrest you again. They confiscated your equipment, and they came on the third day to arrest you again. They did not just arrest you, they had to charge you to court. Ladies and gentlemen, a lot of people don't understand what the police station is for. The purpose of the police station is to gather enough evidence to take the case to the next level, if need be. All right? So the police must have gathered enough evidence to prove that this is a case of espionage, to have been able to charge them to the court. But the question is, what happened between, all right, between the police station and the court? According to the information, they said they were deprived of liberty since July 27. The trio has now been remanded in custody. The filmmakers entered the country on work visas and obtained authorization to film, but were charged with making false declarations on August 17. According to information obtained by RSF, you definitely know that RSF is going to, try their best to frame a narrative that supports them. Now, Sebastian is suffering from a serious health problem that require immediate medical attention. These people are fools. Now, how do you send someone that is medically compromised? How do you send them far away from where they can get any reasonable medical intervention? So now, you see, when somebody is detained and afterwards you are now hearing things like, oh, he has a medical problem that require immediate. This has always been the claim of France whenever any of their personnel is being arrested. And don't get it twisted. Ian Vasili in Mali, the guy that was released, that was a spy, that, they have different names they give to their DGSE agents once they are captured. So you sent somebody who has some medical compromise. You sent him to look at the distance between France and Togo. Anyway, France believes that the Togolese territory belongs to France. That's why they call it Francophone Afrique territories. Those are the territories of France in Africa. When there was a part they call it French Sudan. There was a part they call it French. There is everywhere they go to, they try to claim the land to themselves. So that is why they can enter Togo anyhow and think they can do whatever they want to do. So if somebody has health problem, and the health problem requires immediate. Do you know the meaning of immediate medical attention? Ladies and gentlemen, they said it requires immediate medical attention. This is, when you look at um, the legal aspect of the whole thing, they are trying to put pressure on the authorities of Togo to release him. That is what they are trying to do. Because are you telling us like you don't know this before he traveled all the way from France to Togo? Now, while in Togo, Guy Mocha and Sebastian Perez, accompanied by Togolese fixer, were simply doing their job by filming a documentary series. If they were simply doing their job, man, ladies and gentlemen, Francophone Afrique is compromised on so many levels. They were deprived of their liberty since July 27. They were remanded in custody on August 17. It's a matter of serious concern. RSF is alarmed by the situation that has now lasted for more than 20 days. If you did not do anything, is it possible for you to be detained for more than 20 days? Ladies and gentlemen, let us look at this situation very, very critically. Is it possible? And given the fact that France still wield a lot of influence in Togo, is it possible for these men to be detained for more than 20 days if they were really as innocent as claimed? Now, the organization condemned the unjustified, disproportionate proceeding and called for immediate release of the French media professionals. You can see French media professionals, right? So, are they really French media professionals? Ladies and gentlemen, if you are a French media professionals, there are certain documentation you should have. These are normal things that you should know if you are really, really a French media professional and you are going to some of these territories where France has a lot of influence. In fact, it should be easy peasy, lemon squeezy. It should be so easy for you to navigate your way around. But if you go to these places and you start having to pay illegally, you start having to do too much, ladies and gentlemen, that clause of French media professional is questionable. Now, according to information, they were initially arrested on charges of espionage and they were interrogated at the Kara police station. And later on, the offense was reduced as false framing. So, ladies and gentlemen, this was what happened. So, the filmmakers were arrested while shooting a documentary, initially accused of espionage, formally charged with false statement instead. Now, imagine, let me ask you another question. If Yusra Erbager was suspected when she was in Burkina Faso, now, don't forget, Yusra Erbager was a black woman. If you if you had the opportunity of getting your hands on a camera when she was in Burkina Faso and you were able to see the places she filmed and you were able to listen to a narrative, would you consider Yusra Erbager a journalist or a foreign agent carrying out the objective of the certain deep state she represents? Ladies and gentlemen, Africa needs to wake up. That is why when Israel sees a journalist, they don't see a journalist. I remember the last group of journalists that was killed by the Israeli Air Force. They targeted them knowing that they are journalists. But when the Israeli Foreign Ministry had to speak about it, they said they are journalists during the day, but they are fighters at night. Do you know why Israel had to tag them that way? Because Israel hands is stained. And Israel knows, for all the countries on the planet, Israel knows that before military intervention that will kill a lot of people, these are the agents that are being sent in to lay down the foundation. They know the program. Thank you. They know that these are the people that needs to go to that country to give a certain type of framing. So, and that framing, when the guys on the ground, when they start creating that framing for intervention, their mainstream headquarter, they will start having a debate if certain countries should step into the situation or not. Now they have a lot of PR agency that will give a lot of media PR to it. They will push it up, they will expound and inflame it, and before you know, the military will step in, and before you know what's up, a lot of people will pay the price for it. Before the attack on Libya, they did the same thing. Before the attack on Iran, they did the same thing. Before the attack on Nigeria, they did the same thing. This is what they do before they move in to take a lot of lives, ladies and gentlemen. So when the Israelis see journalists, they know what they represent. They know who they represent. They know whose interests they are there to serve. So, ladies and gentlemen, but I don't know what's the case of, I don't know how to categorize Africans, because if you capture this man with evidence and the initial charge was espionage, and you later, you had to decomplement the case, it means that somebody called somebody that knows somebody that, you know what, let's tone down this case because certain people are involved. According to the timeline of the investigation, they were arrested in Kara in the north while filming a market roughly 12 miles from the Togo-Benin border. Questioned separately for hours. They were questioned separately for hours. Maybe that was where they discovered that this was what they were there for. Now, their equipment were confiscated. They were placed under house arrest from July 27 till July 30th. Ladies and gentlemen, if these were ordinary men, would you need to take this type of measure if they were ordinary men and if they were so innocent? Let's call a spade a spade. These are square pegs in round holes. Then briefly, they were released. Now look at the timeline. They were briefly released, but rearrested on the same day. No, we cannot let this type of men, we can't let them loose just like that, because these are menace to the society. They definitely know. Because why would you release somebody and be like, man, we got to go get, we got to detain them once more? Because they know that you can't just let this type of man, just go out there like that. They were now transferred to Lomé. They were placed in pretrial detention at the Ago Logope camp near Lomé, charged with false statements. But you definitely know calls have been made, claims have been made before it all happened. Ladies and gentlemen, the specific allegation is that they filmed in the north without having obtained the required authorization. Ladies and gentlemen, they did not arrest them because they filmed without authorization. They were investigated, they were charged with espionage, meaning they made some claims that were not true. Now, you see, espionage is the first thing. They toned it down. The second thing was that they did not have the required authorization. When you are about to do something very diabolic, you don't require, look, anything that is not good does not require authorization. So it was one failed measure after another. They know what they were there to do. Luck just ran out of them. They've always done this thing. Imagine if a French journalist can go through the desert of Mauritania and sneak their way into Mali. After they got to Mali, who did they went to visit in Mali? They went to visit the terrorists in the northern part of Mali. So they have a documented reputation of doing this. They were there in northern Mali to talk to the terrorists one-on-one. They were there to have if you look at the video on ARTE TV, the video quality was out of this world. Ladies and gentlemen, when I saw the situation, it was like an out-of-body experience. When you see French journalists, you have to take your rifle out of safety immediately. A terrorist is very, very close to you. It might not be the journalist, but the terrorist is around the corner. So you have to get your gun out of safety and you have to ready to, you have to ready to blow everybody. Because this is what they are known to do. So you cannot blame the Togolese security officer that arrested this individual, because the reputation goes ahead of the French citizens. They are known to do these things. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the situation is still contested. The health concern compounds the situation. Perez-Pezzani has serious medical issues requiring attention, which the RSF and the families have raised publicly. Ladies and gentlemen, they know what they are doing. They know what they are doing. Now, the Foreign Ministry of France confirmed that the pair have been detained since July 27 and are under judicial investigation. July 27. What time is it right now? What time are we on right now? They were detained since July 27. If it's that simple, they should have been released, ladies and gentlemen. Given the fact that, you know how things are in Africa. Number one, they have the complexion, right, for the selection. They have the complexion for the preferential treatment. But even though you have the complexion in a world that has been destroyed from the foundation, when you have the complexion for the selection and for the selective treatment, at the end of the day, you are still detained for that long, it means something is definitely wrong. And that is why I said we need to talk about this before they try to watershed it. Ladies and gentlemen. Now, Jean Noel Barrot stated that France is in contact. Listen, that France is in contact with the Togolese authority so that they can be released as soon as possible. So that was what I said, that whichever way the Togolese authorities will try to go about this case, they are not going out clean. They are going to either go by way of knockout or by way of stoppage. Because if the charge is espionage and now the charge is being toned down, definitely you know that somebody's hands is already rubbing with another, you already know what is going on here. Now, the families were received on Wednesday by the Ministry for Europe and Foreign Affairs. Again, I'm going to say this once more. All right? RFI and France 24, they were suspended from broadcasting in Togo for 3 months. Now listen, over allegations of inaccurate and biased coverage. And Le Monde frames the arrest as part of a broader worsening Paris-Lomé relationship. Ladies and gentlemen, like I said, France, wherever you see them, you have to get your gun out of safety because your life is in danger. This is just the situation. They have been banned for Togo because the Togolese know that these people have the reputation for telling lies, for framing people up. These are not journalists. These are secret agents in Togo to proliferate the interests of France. Ladies and gentlemen, is Togo still a complete vassal of France? That is a big question right there. It seems as though Togo is beginning to look at France in a different way. And if I am beginning to look at you in a different way, that means I am no longer comfortable with your occupation around me. So, ladies and gentlemen, maybe, the coronation of Togo as an independent Pan-African state is beginning to unravel. We'll continue to monitor the situation. Now they are in the pretrial detention, meaning the judicial process is ongoing. And ladies and gentlemen, the charges they actually face right now is far lesser offense than espionage, which suggests that the initial more serious accusation did not survive contact with the courts. Now, you definitely know that if I commit a crime and somebody call on my behalf, we can have negotiation where they be like, okay, please, can you help us to reduce the charge? Because we know if this particular charge gets in contact with courts, we know that these people are not coming out. If France can negotiate the release of a spy in Mali in the name Ian Vasili, they can be the intermediary and they can directly contact the JNIM and Al-Qaeda affiliates that they want 82 Malian soldiers to be released in exchange for a French DGSE spy. You definitely know that when you see France, you see terrorism, ladies and gentlemen. So it further begs the question, what was the mission of France in Africa? Operation Barkhane, Operation Serval, Operation Takuba Task Force. What was the purpose? Was it for the liberation of these countries? Or was it for the proliferation of terrorism and furthermore the glorification of the French foreign interest, ladies and gentlemen? When you see a French citizen, get your gun out of safety because it's about to go down. Now, let me say something. Let me give you historical documentation where French personnel were busy carrying out compromise operation in, foreign countries. Number one, Burkina Faso in December 2023. Now, they documented the case, but the cover was IT workers. They didn't call them journalists at the time. 4 French nationals were arrested in Ouagadougou, and they were presented by Burkinabe authorities as DGSE agents. Paris said, now this is what I said, when you see a French national around, get your gun out of safety because you know their government will defend them. Emmanuel Macron just went to shake hands with Jolani, a known Al-Qaeda terrorist. You definitely know that they will always try to defend the interest of terrorists. Paris said they were IT maintenance staff holding diplomatic passports. They were held for about a year. They were released in December 2024 after Morocco had to help France mediate in the case. This is a real well-sourced documentation, but they were not posing as journalists. They were DGSE agents in Burkina Faso. That was just in December 2023. The pattern is consistent. You go to Mali, Yan Vasili, Yan Christian Bernard Vasili. When you see them, get your gun out of safety. A French national arrested and accused of spying for France and aiding an alleged plot to destabilize the state. He was sentenced to 20 years imprisonment. Then, roughly 2 months later, he was granted a presidential pardon. After France spent a lot of time negotiating back and forth with, with the Malian government, they knew that the Malian government were not ready to release him. So they had to bring in another chip into the bargain to try to spice things up and say, we have 82 Malian soldiers, under the custody of the Al-Qaeda. We can help you negotiate the release of those 82 personnel. If you can, grant a sort of presidential pardon, you can do this, ladies and gentlemen. And he was granted a presidential pardon, and, Ian Vasili was told to leave the country with immediate effect. This is a real documented case of espionage, but the cover was that Ian Vasili was a journalist and a French ambassador. When you see them, get your gun out of safety. Now, the third case, they call the name of this individual, Claire Dubois. Everybody knows that I've been following the geopolitical landscape in West Africa. You know the case of Claire Dubois. Now, this is a French spy caught by Ibrahim Traore between 2024 and 2025. This is this counter example, and it is the one you should know ice cold. This went viral, claiming French agents were caught posing as an NGO director or journalist in Burkina Faso. AFP fact-checked and Euronews tried to debunk them. Claire Dubois' image was there. It was documented, accused of espionage in Burkina Faso. A lot of people talked about it, but the French media, the French government tried to say that, okay, this was a fabricated case and all of that. But at the end of the day, that was documented in 2024. Now, historically, the Franc-Afrique era intelligence network, France posts independent intelligence presence in Africa, the DGSE, the SDECE network, operating under Jacques Foucault and funds action is well documented by historians, but this was diplomatic, commercial, and military cover. The journalist cover was not documented signature of that era. The broader point, ladies and gentlemen, is that this is not the first time that French operatives have stationed themselves in Africa to carry out espionage for the foreign interests of France. We definitely know that these people have always tried their best. When they were in Gaddafi, they released a documentary on how they destabilized Libya. They titled the documentary of Espionage. This documentary was made by the French government and they released it, they put it out there. Ladies and gentlemen, France is known for carrying out sabotage, for doing a lot of dirty job. Anywhere you find them, get your gun out of safety. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is because this case was changed, was toned down from a case of espionage into a case of disinformation. And that is why we say, you know what? We won't let the situation be thrown under the carpet just like that. Because France have just committed another atrocity in Togo, and the world should know that this is what they represent and this is what they stand for. Anywhere you see them, get your gun out of safety. Because now they're getting a little bit more popular in Nigeria. And let me tell you the statistical context of why you know that France is already popular in Nigeria. When you see them, you definitely know that somewhere in the northwestern part of Nigeria, the JNIM are beginning to become very, very popular. So when you see certain countries, you see certain terrorist group, because on the ground, those terrorists, they are their occupation forces. If they are not going to have any military collaboration with the Nigerian government, then later on, you will see that, certain security network in the country will start trying to contact them, that we see that you have the experience of combating this particular terrorist group. Different terrorist group have different modes of operation. They will be like, we think you have the expertise in combating the JNIM terrorist group. Then you start seeing different JNIM experts. They will start coming from, God knows where. They will tell you, we know how they operate. We can train your troops on how to get them or to put them in check. Before you know, they get into your country. They go to the resource zone because they have the resource map of Africa. When they came and they sent the Christian missionaries to Africa, they were not there to preach the gospel. They were there to map out what region of your country you have resources. And ladies and gentlemen, if you go and check these places today, those are the places they call, government zone. Stay clear. They call them federal government land. They give them all sort of name. And years after, you will see that a lot of nefarious activities going on in these places. Ladies and gentlemen, this is why we come out again to say that we are not going to rest. This is just my message to the detractors out there. To every French DGSE out there, ladies and gentlemen, we will not leave you alone. My friend, we will not leave you alone. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to take this opportunity to say thank you to everybody on the Android community. You all are the big Android. You are the representation of the Android community. Without you, there is no Android community. Now we're 27,000 plus and counting. This is a proof that we can still defy the sanction regime of this platform, and we can still grow. Ladies and gentlemen, we're growing and we are progressing. A luta continua, Victoria Santa. Now, this is my message to my friends. We will not leave you alone. The more you destabilize Africa, the more we try to come for you with everything we have. We will not come for you with sentiment. We'll come for you with facts. Your reputation is the bargaining chip is on the line. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching, and God bless you, man. La patrie du le monde, we are here. And long live the